The ground beneath their feet trembled. The roar of engines vibrated the air, filling the cockpit of Darien Voss's command ship with a low, constant rumble that rattled every bone in his body. The stench of burning fuel mingled with the acrid scent of sweat and metal, a pungent reminder of the intense battle raging above them. Outside the reinforced glass of his cockpit, Earth's capital city lay in ruins, flames licking at the sky, smoke billowing like dark clouds over a stormy ocean. The first wave of the Empire's assault had hit hard. "They've underestimated us," Voss muttered to himself as his fingers danced over the controls, sending his fighter weaving through the chaos of space debris. The Empire thought they could crush humanity with a single, swift blow. They thought Earth was just another insignificant speck, ripe for conquest, another system to subjugate in their quest for galactic supremacy. But the invaders hadn't accounted for the unrelenting nature of the planet they'd chosen to attack. Earth was a death world, and humanity had learned to survive, adapt, and fight back with ferocity no other species had ever experienced. "Commander Voss," a voice crackled through the communication line, pulling him from his thoughts. It was Captain Alina Kessler, his second in command. Her voice was steady, but Voss could hear the weight of the battle in her tone. "The enemy's capital ship is about to break formation. Should we engage?" Darien's eyes flicked over the glowing readouts, his mind calculating the risk in an instant. He could see the Empire's flagship maneuvering, its weapons primed and ready, its massive frame looming over the battlefield like a predator poised to strike. But it was vulnerable, its shield strength weakening from the barrage Earth's forces had launched earlier. A glimmer of hope. "Not yet," he said, voice low and determined. "They're too confident. Let them make the first move. We'll catch them when they think they've already won." "Understood," Kessler replied. Voss could feel the tension through her words, but he trusted her instincts. They were all playing the long game now. The Earth fleet, battered but not broken, was regrouping, preparing for the Empire's next attack. Voss had no illusions. This wouldn't be easy. Earth was facing an enemy with superior technology, massive warships, ion cannons that could turn cities to ash with a single shot, and shields capable of absorbing blasts that would have obliterated any other fleet. The invaders didn't understand that humanity wasn't just about technological prowess. They were about grit, survival, and, most importantly, adaptability. Darien's thoughts were interrupted by the shrill alarm blaring from the comms panel. He barely glanced at the screen, already knowing what it meant. A new wave of Empire fighters was inbound. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Voss barked, slamming his hand down on the controls, sending the ship into a roll. The ship's hull shuddered as it was buffeted by the shock waves of nearby explosions. The fighters, sleek and menacing, swarmed around him, their weapons firing in rapid succession. He gritted his teeth and accelerated, the cockpit vibrating as the ship shot through space, narrowly avoiding the ion blasts that cracked the dark void like thunderclaps. The stench of burning circuitry filled the air as Voss engaged the ship's countermeasures, sending clouds of chaff scattering through the void. His ship lurched to the side as a blast grazed his right wing, and for a moment the world outside his window was nothing but a blaze of light and shadows. In his ear, Kessler's voice was calm, even amidst the chaos. "We've got their attention now. I'm sending backup. Hold tight." Voss barely had time to process her words before another fighter appeared beside him, its markings unmistakable. The backup wasn't just any fleet. This was a coalition of the most diverse, unorthodox forces Earth had ever rallied. Rogue engineers, former military personnel, and civilians who had picked up arms to defend their home. They weren't organized in the traditional sense, not like the Empire's rigid command structure, but that had become their strength. "Stay with me, Kessler." "Let's make this count," Voss muttered. The roar of the fighters' engines was deafening as they danced through the fray, weaving in and out of enemy fire. closing in on the vulnerable Empire ships. It was a symphony of chaos. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Earth's fighters, though smaller and less advanced, had an edge: creativity. They didn't fight according to the book. They used whatever they had, from discarded weapons to old tech that the Empire never expected to see again. Humanity had a way of turning desperation into innovation. Voss's finger hovered over the firing controls, then pressed down with a precise force. His ship's weapon systems lit up, and a torrent of energy surged out, striking one of the Empire's smaller ships, taking it down in a shower of sparks and debris. The victory was brief, but it was a start. "Nice shot, Commander," Kessler's voice crackled through, though there was no time for celebration. The Empire wasn't about to give up so easily. Above them, the Empire's flagship fired again, a brilliant beam of energy cutting through the blackness. It tore into one of Earth's cruisers, igniting it in a flash of light. The shockwave hit Voss's ship, rattling the hull and nearly throwing him from his seat. His vision blurred for a moment, but his hands gripped the controls tighter. His breath came in ragged gasps as he recalibrated his systems, the smell of burning electronics filling the air. "Pull back! We need to regroup." Kessler's command echoed over the comms, but Voss's jaw was set. "Number." "We're not running," he said, voice cold with resolve. "Not when we've come this far." The Empire had underestimated them. They had seen a world of chaos, a planet that seemed torn apart by its own disasters, and thought it would be easy to dominate. What they didn't realize was that Earth's true power lay not in its technology or advanced weapons, but in its people. Humans had thrived in the harshest conditions, from the boiling deserts to the freezing tundras, from the deepest oceans to the most barren wastelands. They had learned to survive where no other species could. "Commander Voss, we've got one shot at this," Kessler warned. "Let's make sure we take it." Voss's eyes narrowed as he watched the Empire's flagship preparing to launch another devastating barrage. The light from the blast illuminated the darkness of space like an artificial sunrise. But this time Voss was ready. With a cold smile, he ordered, "Activate the countermeasures, now." A series of high-frequency signals pulsed out from Earth's ships, a jamming wave that disrupted the Empire's targeting systems. The flagship's weapons misfired, shooting wild bursts of energy into empty space. Voss didn't wait for the flagship to recover. He pressed the attack, coordinating with his fleet, striking when the Empire was at its weakest. In the chaos of battle, a harsh realization hit the invaders. Earth wasn't just fighting for survival. They were fighting for their future. And the Empire had just awakened the beast they had no chance of containing. This first part sets the stage for an intense conflict, grounded in both tactical warfare and the resilience of humanity. The plot pivots on Earth's ability to adapt, outmaneuver, and ultimately outlast an invader who thought they could conquer with sheer force. The battle scenes are action-packed, vivid and sensory-rich, with an escalating sense of urgency. This portion aligns tightly with the title, "They Declared War on a Deathworld. Now They Pray for Peace," as it demonstrates the first powerful counterstrike from Earth, leaving the invaders to wonder if they've bitten off more than they can chew. The Empire's flagship limped through the wreckage of its fleet, a hulking shadow with a gaping wound in its side where Earth's weapons had struck. The Empire had underestimated Earth, yes, but now, as they regrouped, they faced the consequences of their arrogance. The stars seemed darker, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. The moment of victory was fleeting, and the Empire's strategy, once unshakable, had become a shifting sandcastle on the shores of a storm. Inside his ship, Commander Darian Voss watched the flickering holograms that mapped out the battlefield. His fingers hovered over the controls, every nerve alight with the tension of what was to come. His chest rose and fell with each breath as the weight of the next move hung in the balance. The battle was far from over. "Commander, the enemy is regrouping," Kessler's voice cut through the static, calm but clipped. "They've pulled back into formation. We're facing a second wave." Voss clenched his jaw, eyes narrowing. The remnants of Earth's forces had caused a dent in the Empire's might, but the battle was still in its opening stages. "We can't let them reorganize. They'll come at us like a tidal wave if we don't strike now." He could almost feel the cold of space pressing against the hull of his ship, a stark contrast to the hot adrenaline racing through his blood. The command room was bathed in the pale glow of red warning lights. The faint, metallic tang of sweat clung to the air. Outside, the sun cast its light over the planet's battered surface. On the ground, Earth's cities were in flames. And yet Voss knew what they had seen above was only the beginning. The Empire's tactics, honed for centuries, had worked against countless civilizations. The Empire had crushed rebellions, wiped out entire species, all with the force of their technologically superior war machines. But they had never encountered a world like Earth. The Empire's fleet had expected humanity to crumble beneath the first onslaught. What they hadn't expected was the unyielding spirit of a species backed into a corner, one that had fought for survival in ways the Empire's generals could never have imagined. "Do we have eyes on the enemy's new formation?" Voss's voice was low, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like an iron cloak. "We're tracking them," Kessler replied. "Their strategy hasn't changed, but they've retreated to the outer orbit. They're pulling back to reload and reassess. It's a tactical move." Voss's fingers tightened on the console. He knew this was the critical moment. The Empire was vulnerable, but only if Earth acted quickly. He had no illusions. This wasn't a game of attrition, where Earth could afford to slowly chip away at the invaders. The Empire had the firepower to end the fight in one swift blow. They were simply giving humanity a moment to catch its breath. "That's their mistake," he muttered. "They think they've won. Let's show them what happens when you think Earth's defeated." He turned to the tactical board. His eyes flicked from one data readout to another. A low hum filled the room as Voss's mind began to spin a web of strategy, the web of a man who had been trained not just to fight, but to outthink his enemies at every turn. "Prepare the fighters," Voss ordered. "We're going in hot. We won't let them regroup." Above, in the empty black, the Empire's forces adjusted, their massive warships hanging in formation, seemingly invulnerable. Their colossal silhouettes loomed in the dark like ancient predators waiting to pounce. Earth's forces had forced them back for now, but the tension in the air was thick, crackling with potential violence. The fleet, 50 ships strong, had pulled back from the engagement, but they hadn't retreated far enough to be out of striking range. They were waiting for the perfect moment to unleash hell. General Iral Thrax stood at the helm of the Empire's flagship, his gloved hand gripping the console. His many eyes flicked over the data with the precision of a surgeon. He could feel the anger of his fleet simmering behind him, the whispered curses of soldiers who had never faced a challenge they couldn't crush beneath their boots. "Hold the line," Thrax muttered to himself. His voice was low, full of the tension that came from realizing how much he had misjudged his adversary. His fleet had been hit hard, but his confidence hadn't been shaken yet. Not entirely. "Once the shields are restored, we'll return fire." But even as he spoke, something didn't sit right with him. The first battle had been too easy. His forces had wiped out smaller, less advanced civilizations before, but Earth was something else entirely. It wasn't just about brute force. It was something more. Their unpredictability, the sheer will to survive, made them dangerous. "General," one of his officers interrupted his thoughts, "we've detected Earth fighters moving into attack range." Thrax stood still for a moment, his mind processing the information. Earth's fighters were small, their weaponry primitive compared to the Empire's, but they had a surprising agility. The Empire's fleet had learned that lesson the hard way. They didn't move like the conventional forces they were used to fighting. These humans, these creatures, were unlike anything Thrax had ever encountered. "Prepare for battle," he barked. "We'll engage them on our terms. We have the advantage. Let's make sure they understand that." Down below, on the surface of Earth, the air was thick with the sound of war. Sirens wailed, smoke clouded the sky, and the vibrations from distant explosions shook the ground like the footfalls of giants. The ground had become a battlefield. Humanity was everywhere and nowhere at once. A patchwork of resistance movements, military personnel, and civilians had turned the entire planet into one massive trap. The Empire's forces had come thinking they could subjugate Earth easily. Instead, they found themselves enmeshed in a war of attrition, a war they could never have prepared for. "Voss," Kessler's voice came over the comms, urgent and clear. "The Empire's launching a counteroffensive. They're not wasting time. If we don't move now, they'll destroy everything." Voss's jaw tightened. He had known this would come. The Empire would react to their losses. They would seek to crush Earth's defenses in one fell swoop. It was time to put his plan into action. This wasn't just about winning a battle. It was about turning the tide of the war in Earth's favor. "Activate the EMPs," Voss ordered. "We take out their communications, and then we strike." The tension in the air was palpable as Earth's forces prepared for the next wave. The rumble of energy coursed through the ships as the EMPs fired, a blinding light flashing from the planetary defense grid. The Empire's fleet suddenly found itself without the vital coordination it had relied on. "They've hit our systems." Thrax's voice was a growl of frustration. He felt it in his chest, that creeping sense of dread, as his fleet began to falter, disoriented. The sudden chaos within their ranks sent a shiver through him, but he quickly regained his composure. Earth was unpredictable, but he was still the general of the most formidable fleet in the galaxy. Voss could feel the pulse of the conflict, the distant thrum of victory still just beyond reach, but it was there, in the edges of the chaos. He could taste it. "Prepare for the final push," he said, his voice cold and firm. "Let's make them beg for peace." As the battle raged on, the pieces of a much larger game were falling into place. Voss didn't need to defeat the Empire in one stroke. He only needed to ensure that they couldn't win. He was playing a long game, a game where every move was a calculated risk. Humanity had shown their hand. Now it was time for the invaders to realize just how far they had fallen into the trap. And with every passing moment, Earth grew stronger. The Empire's grip on the galaxy was beginning to slip. The darkness of space pressed against the hull of Darien Voss's ship like an unyielding force, its oppressive weight mirrored by the tension inside the command center. Voss leaned forward, eyes flicking across the tactical displays, his mind calculating, anticipating the next move. The Empire's fleet had retreated, but their regrouping hadn't been a sign of surrender. It was a warning. The calm before the storm as they prepared to launch their second wave, their final assault. Earth's forces had tasted victory, but it was still far from over. The Empire's technological superiority was undeniable, and if they struck back with full force, Earth might not survive the blow. Voss's fingers drummed against the cold metal of his console. The air in the cockpit was thick with the tang of ionized metal, the subtle scent of synthetic oxygen swirling around him, the buzz of communication equipment, the whirring of diagnostic systems filled the silence with a hum of impending battle. He could hear Kessler's voice over the comm, steady, sharp. "Commander, we've detected movement. The Empire is mobilizing for their final push. They're assembling a fleet larger than anything we've faced." Voss exhaled sharply, his gaze locked on the screen before him. He knew what was coming. The Empire's arrogance had been their first mistake, but now it was no longer about overconfidence. The invaders had adjusted, learned from their earlier setbacks. They would come at Earth with everything they had left, and Earth would have to fight back with even more than that. "They're playing their last card," Voss said quietly, more to himself than to Kessler. "And so are we." A sharp crackling sound broke the tension, and then Kessler's voice, a note of urgency cutting through. "We've got incoming transmission. Empire ships are on the move. The battle is about to begin." Voss's pulse quickened, but his face remained calm. This was the moment. Earth had fought, endured, and learned. Now they would make their stand. The battle outside raged on, a tapestry of flashing lights and distant explosions in the void. Empire warships, massive and formidable, cut through the stars like an unstoppable wave. Their dark silhouettes were menacing, their weapons primed and ready. It seemed impossible that humanity could hold their ground. But Voss knew better. The Empire was powerful, yes, but they were not invincible. The war had always been about more than technology. It had always been about strategy. "Send out the drones," Voss ordered, his voice low but sharp. The unmanned units would be the vanguard, drawing the Empire's fire, giving Earth's fleets the opportunity to maneuver. The drones were crude, but effective in their own right. Cannon fodder designed to weaken the enemy's resolve, to throw them off balance. The Empire's sensors picked up the movement, their ships shifting to respond. But Voss had planned for this. He'd anticipated their reaction. He knew they would counter, that they would try to overwhelm the drones. The next phase was already set in motion. The Earth fleet, hidden behind the debris of a shattered satellite ring, would spring into action as soon as the Empire took the bait. The ships opened fire, launching bursts of plasma that tore through the empty vacuum. The drones erupted into fireballs of metal and circuitry, their energy shields flickering and disintegrating. But as the Empire's fleet surged forward, they exposed themselves to Earth's trap. "Now," Voss whispered, barely audible. His fingers slid over the controls, and Earth's ships emerged from the debris field like ghosts, fast and silent. The air in the cockpit seemed to crackle as Voss's strategy unfolded with deadly grace. Earth's fleet tore into the Empire's exposed flank with unrelenting force. Explosions rippled across the surface of the enemy ships as their shields, already weakened from the drone barrage, faltered under the sustained fire from Earth's laser cannons. The scent of burned metal filled the command center as the shock waves reverberated through the ship, the noise of the battle thundering in their ears.
In the midst of the chaos, Voss's mind remained eerily calm. His crew, though battle-hardened, were still human. Fear was an inevitable companion on the battlefield, but Voss had learned to keep it at bay. His eyes narrowed as he watched the enemy response. Brilliant, yes, but flawed. The Empire retaliated with a vengeance, their weapons streaking through space like angry comets, their energy pulses illuminating the dark void. One of Earth's cruisers was hit, its shield cracked and shattered, the ship groaning under the pressure. The explosion lit up the heavens, but Voss didn't flinch. There was no time for hesitation. There was no room for fear. "Focus fire on their flagship," Voss commanded, his voice steady. "Take out their command center. Everything else is secondary." The Earth fleet shifted, bringing all their firepower to bear on the heart of the Empire's forces. Voss watched, feeling the tension in his bones as the laser beams hit the flagship, one after another, until its shields began to splinter. The air was thick with anticipation. The crew's collective breath held as the seconds stretched long, stretching into eternity. And then it happened. The flagship's shields faltered for the last time, and Earth's forces struck with devastating force. The ship's hull buckled, smoke pouring from the breach. The Empire's flagship was no longer a threat. For a moment the battlefield seemed to fall silent, the only sound the distant rumble of crumbling warships and the soft beeping of the command consoles. Voss allowed himself a single fleeting moment of satisfaction. Earth had won this battle, but there was no time to celebrate. "Incoming," Kessler's voice snapped Voss back to reality. New signature on the sensors, a larger vessel, unknown class. It's on an intercept course. Voss's heart skipped a beat. The Empire wasn't done. They had been holding something back, something bigger, something they had kept hidden until now. What's the status on our defensive perimeter? Voss asked, his mind already calculating their options. Not good, Kessler replied, the tension in her voice a stark contrast to her usual calm demeanor. We're going to need reinforcements, or this could get ugly. Voss's eyes darted to the tactical display as a new threat materialized on the screen. An enormous battleship, unlike anything Earth had faced before. Its dark silhouette blotted out the stars, its weapons systems locked on Earth's fleet. They've been holding this back for the right moment, Voss muttered, and now they're ready to finish it. There was a quiet moment, a brief lull in the chaos, as the two fleets sized each other up. The silence was deafening. Voss could almost hear the gears of fate turning, the inevitable clash between two forces on the edge of annihilation. This wasn't just a battle anymore. It was a defining moment. Prepare for the worst, Voss ordered, his voice steady as ever, though his mind raced, and make sure they remember Earth's name when we're done. The Empire had made its move, and now Earth would make its final stand. The air in the cockpit was electric, charged with the sense of an inevitable outcome. The new threat loomed larger, and Earth's forces braced for what was coming. The silence between the explosions felt heavier than any sound, pressing down like an unspoken promise. The final confrontation was near, and as the two fleets prepared for their ultimate clash, one question hung in the air like a whisper: would Earth survive this final test, or would they finally fall to the might of the Empire? The answer would come soon, but not yet, not today. The silence was suffocating. After the Empire's flagship had crumbled, the chaos of battle had momentarily receded into a strange, uneasy lull. Earth's forces, battered but resolute, regrouped for what seemed like an inevitable final push. But just as victory seemed within their grasp, a dark shadow loomed on the horizon, a new threat far larger and more formidable than anything Earth had faced before. Voss stared at the screen, his jaw clenched tight as his fingers hovered over the command console. A massive ship appeared on the tactical display, its silhouette cutting through the darkness of space. It was like nothing they had ever encountered. The ship's size alone made the air in the cockpit feel heavier, more oppressive, as if the very weight of it was pressing down on them. It's not over yet, Voss muttered to himself, his breath coming in slow, steady exhales. He could hear the soft beeping of the monitors, the sharp, urgent tone in Kessler's voice, but none of it reached him, not truly. His mind was locked on the new threat, calculating, thinking, always thinking. What's the status on their weapons? Voss asked, his voice steady, though the urgency was clear in his eyes. They're primed, Commander, Kessler responded. Her usual calm was gone, replaced by an edge that only came when the stakes were higher than ever. That ship is designed for one thing: to obliterate. Voss didn't reply immediately. He didn't need to. The Empire's final gambit had come at the worst possible moment. Earth's forces were exhausted, their ships damaged, and now they had to face something that could turn the tide of the entire war in one strike. The new battleship loomed larger as it closed the distance, its dark hull reflecting the cold, distant stars. It was an apex predator in space, a weapon of unimaginable power that seemed almost alive, pulsing with an energy all its own. The very sight of it was enough to send a shiver down the spine, the promise of devastation written in every twisted line of its design. Hold steady, Voss commanded. This is our moment. If we fight like we've always fought together, Earth will win. The words came with the weight of truth, but even Voss could feel the uncertainty settling in his chest. How many more battles could they survive? How much longer could Earth's battered fleet withstand this kind of assault? Kessler's voice came through the comms again, sharp and direct. Commander, they're charging their main weapon. It's focused right on us. Voss's eyes locked onto the screen, watching as the massive ship powered up its weapon systems, the growing energy pulse visible even from this distance. It was a beacon of doom, an undeniable signal that the Empire was done playing games. They would annihilate Earth's last hope if it was the last thing they did. All units prepare for evasive maneuvers, Voss ordered, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. We can't outrun this thing, but we can make it bleed. Divide their focus, distract them, make them pay for every shot. The crew moved with practiced urgency, their hands flying over the consoles, working together as if they were all one mind. The energy in the room was palpable, thick with the anticipation of what was to come. Voss felt his pulse quicken as his ship veered, spinning out of the line of fire, narrowly avoiding the first volley of blasts from the Empire's colossal weapon. The impact rocked the ship, a heavy vibration that rattled through the entire vessel. Direct hit on the outer hull, Kessler shouted, shields holding but barely. Voss grimaced. The damage was already being done, but there was no time to assess it properly. He couldn't afford to lose focus. Not now, not when they were so close. The massive battleship loomed again, shifting slightly as if to target a new spot on Earth's fleet. Voss could feel the weight of each move, the deadly precision with which the Empire was closing in on them. Every second counted. Every decision had to be flawless. Voss exhaled sharply, his mind racing. He glanced over at Kessler, her eyes hard with determination. She knew what had to be done. Launch the decoys, he said, the words heavy but necessary. The decoys were their last chance, small maneuverable drones designed to confuse and overwhelm enemy targeting systems. They would draw the fire long enough for Earth's fleet to reposition, to create a real opportunity for a counterattack. Kessler's hands flew across her console, sending the drones scattering through space in every direction. The decoys, glowing with false signatures, formed a shimmering cloud around the Earth ships, distorting the Empire's targeting systems. The massive battleship fired again, but its blast missed, cutting through empty space as the drones swarmed in a chaotic ballet, their paths unpredictable, erratic. Voss watched as the decoys drew more fire. The Empire's massive ship now thrashing with frustration, but that frustration was not enough to defeat them. Not yet, now, Voss said, his voice almost a growl, his fingers tapping against his console. Focus everything on their engines. We cripple them here now, and it's over. A chorus of confirmation echoed across the comms. Earth's fleet pivoted, targeting the heart of the Empire's weaponry. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about making them pay for every inch of Earth they had destroyed. Earth's weapons blazed with violent intensity, the flashes of energy cutting through the vastness of space, like cracks in the sky. The Empire's battleship staggered, its mighty frame trembling under the weight of Earth's barrage. The energy shields flickered and faltered, unable to absorb the concentrated force. For a moment the ship seemed to waver, teetering on the edge of collapse. Voss's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let himself celebrate. Not yet, they weren't done. Not by a long shot. The Empire's ship was still firing, and its counterattack was brutal, its shots targeted with a cold, ruthless efficiency. Voss's ship rocked again, the force of the blast rattling the entire crew. The systems screeched with the effort to stabilize, to maintain their hold against the Empire's might. The room around Voss was filled with the sharp scent of burning circuitry, the sting of sweat and metal mixing as the damage mounted. Shields are failing, Kessler reported, her voice strained. We can't take another hit like that. Then don't, Voss snapped, his gaze fixed on the massive ship on the screen. Pull back and regroup. We'll hit them when they're vulnerable. But the words tasted bitter. Earth's fleet had been battered, its resources stretched thin. Time was running out. Then something unexpected happened. The enemy ship seemed to pull back, its weapons slowing, its massive form shifted slightly, almost imperceptibly, as if preparing for something. Voss's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit him. They're retreating, Kessler said, disbelief in her voice. They're pulling back. Voss's brow furrowed as he watched the massive battleship begin to disengage. The Empire wasn't done, not by any means, but they were retreating. For now, the battle wasn't over, but for the first time since the war began, Voss allowed himself to exhale. He didn't trust this retreat. It was too sudden, too calculated. There had to be more to it. The Empire wasn't going to just give up. They were far too powerful, and this wasn't their first defeat. Don't let your guard down, Voss said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline that still coursed through his veins. They're planning something. This isn't over. And as the Empire's flagship disappeared into the dark of space, leaving Earth's forces to wonder what came next, Voss's instincts screamed that the worst was still to come. The last remnants of the Empire's fleet were nothing more than twisted metal and broken promises, floating aimlessly through the dark void of space. Earth's forces, battered, scarred, but standing watched as the enemy ship, the one that had once seemed like an unstoppable juggernaut, limped away into the vast emptiness, its lights flickering like the dying embers of a flame. The air in the command center was thick with the lingering hum of the battle, the sharp tang of metal and sweat still lingering in the cramped room. Every eye was on the screen, watching the final moments of the war unfold. Darien Voss stood at the front of the room, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes not on the fading remnants of the Empire's might, but on something more important. The battle had ended, but the war wasn't just about what had been won, it was about what had been lost, and what had been gained. Earth had fought like no other species had ever fought. They had fought not with superior firepower, not with advanced technology, but with the raw primal will to survive, and it had been enough. "We've done it," Kessler said, her voice hoarse, tinged with disbelief. She stood at the console, her fingers hovering over the controls, unsure of what to do next. The chaos had ended. The impossible had happened. "No," Voss corrected her, his voice sharp. "We didn't just do it, we made them remember what it means to face a death world." His gaze swept over the room, meeting the eyes of every soldier, every officer, every fighter who had stood with him. "We made them pray for peace, because they realized far too late that they never understood us." The room was silent for a long moment, save for the subtle clink of metal, the quiet rush of breath. Voss allowed the weight of his words to sink in, watching his crew absorb the truth of it. They hadn't just survived. They had fought, they had bled, and in doing so they had sent a message. The galaxy would never forget this. Kessler exhaled slowly, turning to face him. "You were right, they underestimated us. We didn't give them what they expected. We didn't cower. We fought back in ways they couldn't fathom." Voss's eyes darkened as he turned toward the view of Earth, the once pristine planet now scarred, but alive. The war had changed it, had changed everything. They had fought for their home, and now it was a symbol of resilience, not because of weapons, not because of technology, but because of humanity itself, the will to survive. "We didn't just fight for Earth," Voss said, his voice low, deliberate. "We fought for the future, for every world out there that thought they could conquer us, for every species that thought they could impose their will." The Empire came to Earth believing it was just another stepping stone. They thought we were primitive, a dying race ripe for extermination. They didn't understand what it means to live on a death world. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over them. "And now they do." The silence in the room deepened as the enormity of the war's conclusion hung in the air. The war wasn't won by technology or superior firepower. It wasn't won by fleets of ships or laser cannons. It was won by the very essence of what it meant to be human, the capacity to adapt, to endure, to fight back against impossible odds. Voss's hand reached out, touching the console in front of him. The holographic display flickered, showing the remaining Empire ships drifting aimlessly, their weapons silenced. Earth's forces were victorious, but at what cost? The scars on their ships, the lives lost, they could never be erased. They could never be forgotten. "We've given them peace," Voss said, his voice quiet now, contemplative, "but it's a peace we had to force on them. A peace they'll never forget, and the galaxy will never forget what Earth did." The crew around him shifted, the weight of the words settling into their bones. For all the victories, there would be no celebration. Not yet. Earth had survived. But the cost was too high, the loss too deep, and yet in that silence, there was also something else, something undeniable. Earth had fought. Earth had won. "Commander," a voice interrupted, soft but insistent. It was one of the younger officers, his face drawn, his eyes still wide from the battle. "What happens now?" Voss turned toward him, his gaze steady. "Now?" He paused for a moment, letting the question hang in the air. The war had changed everything, but the fight wasn't over. Not yet. Now we rebuild. We take what we've learned, and we build a future where Earth stands as an example of what happens when you underestimate humanity. The officer nodded, but Voss could see the question still in his eyes. It wasn't just about rebuilding Earth, it was about what came next. What came after a war like this? What would the galaxy look like now that Earth had shown its true strength? The tension in the room was thick, the future uncertain, but one thing was clear: humanity had not only survived, They had defined their place in the galaxy, and they had done it by being exactly what the Empire had feared most: unpredictable, untamable, and stronger than anyone had ever thought possible. The screens flickered again, the cold, mechanical voice of the comm system cutting through the silence. New transmission incoming. From the Galactic Council, Voss straightened, his expression unreadable. He knew what this was. He knew what was coming. The screen flashed to life, the stern face of a high-ranking official appearing before him. The figure was familiar, but the words that came next were anything but. "We are extending an official request for peace talks, Commander Voss," the voice said, as if struggling to accept what had happened. "We apologize for the misunderstanding. We offer our terms for a permanent cessation of hostilities." Voss didn't flinch. He had seen this coming, but it still felt surreal. The Galactic Council, the once mighty rulers of the galaxy, were now begging for peace, and they weren't doing it because they saw humanity as an equal. They were doing it because they had realized too late that Earth could never be conquered. Humanity had become something they couldn't control, something they couldn't even begin to understand. "Peace," Voss said, his voice as calm as it had ever been. "You're asking for peace now, after everything." The official on the screen hesitated. "Yes, we understand now. You are not a civilization we can conquer. You are a force of nature. We acknowledge that." The words felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on his chest. The price of victory had been high, but in the end, humanity had won not because of their weapons, but because of their spirit. "We accept your offer," Voss said quietly, his voice carrying the weight of history. "But understand this, we won't forget what you tried to do, and Earth will never kneel before anyone again." As the transmission ended, Voss stood there, his gaze fixed on the empty space where the Empire's fleet had once loomed. The galaxy had changed. Earth had made its mark, and now they would write their own future. It wasn't about survival anymore. It was about something much bigger: Earth's place in the galaxy, as a force that would never again be underestimated. The war had ended, humanity had fought, and they had won. And now, for the first time in history, the galaxy would remember what it meant to face a death world.